spent $350,000 on a wedding that looked like something out of a royal fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers, imported roses, and champagne fountains that never stopped flowing. But when I asked them to help save my daughter's life, they said they couldn't afford it. That night, I stood outside their mansion, holding hospital bills in one hand and my little girl's medication in the other, realizing the ugliest truth: money doesn't make people generous. It just shows who they really are. I was invisible to them then, but time has a way of changing everything, because the same people who turned their backs on us would one day come crawling to me, begging for the mercy they once refused. Before we go deep, tell me, where are you watching from? I still remember the sound of the heart monitor, that slow, rhythmic beep that reminded me my daughter was still here. Every morning, I would wake up in that cold hospital room before the nurses changed shifts. The fluorescent lights flickered like they were struggling to stay alive too, and the smell of antiseptic had become my new perfume. Lily was only 8, too small to understand the weight of the machines keeping her alive, but her spirit was stronger than anyone I'd ever known. She would smile at me and say, "Mommy, don't worry, I'll get better." And I would nod even when my chest burned from holding back tears. Life had already tested me more than most. I was 32, a single mother since my ex walked out when Lily was a baby. He couldn't handle the responsibility, said he wanted freedom, and disappeared without leaving so much as a child support check. I worked every job I could find, waitressing at the diner during the day, cleaning offices at night, doing laundry for others on weekends. I wasn't living, I was surviving. But none of that mattered because Lily was worth every ounce of exhaustion. When she got sick, the world felt like it stopped spinning. One day, she was running around the park in her little yellow dress. The next, she was fainting in the kitchen, while I scrambled to catch her before she hit the floor. The doctors said it was a rare congenital heart defect that required an immediate surgery, something beyond my insurance, beyond anything I could afford. I tried fundraising, selling what little we had, even taking loans that buried me deeper in debt, but it was never enough. That's when I turned to my family. My sister, Caroline, had always been the golden child. Beautiful, elegant, married into money, living in a world of wine tastings and vacation homes. Her husband, Ethan, was the type who shook hands with politicians and bragged about stock portfolios at dinner parties. They lived in a glass mansion on the hill overlooking the same town I cleaned for a living. When I drove there, my old car wheezed up their driveway like it knew it didn't belong. The moment she opened the door, everything about her screamed perfection: silk dress, diamond earrings, the faint scent of imported roses. She smiled that practiced smile that looked more like pity than love. I told her about Lily, about the surgery, about how much it would cost. My hands shook as I slid the estimate across her marble counter. For a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Not compassion, but calculation. Then she said she wished she could help, but the wedding expenses had already gone over budget. She said they had commitments, that I should look into charities or medical crowdfunding. Her husband didn't even look up from his phone. I stood there, feeling like a beggar in front of people who used to call me family. I wanted to scream, to tell them that their floral arrangements alone cost more than my daughter's life. But instead, I just nodded, thanked them for their time, and walked out. The air outside was cold, and when I looked back, I could see the faint glow of their crystal chandeliers through the window. It looked like heaven from the outside, but I'd just seen hell within. In the weeks that followed, Lily's condition worsened. I watched her fade little by little, the sparkle in her eyes dimming as her heartbeat grew weaker. The wedding became the talk of the town. People called it the event of the decade. I saw photos online of my sister in a gown worth more than everything I owned, smiling, dancing, loved by hundreds, while my daughter was fighting for her life in a hospital bed. I tried not to hate her, but how can a mother not feel rage when she sees her child dying, while others drown in luxury? The night of the wedding, I sat beside Lily's bed, holding her tiny hand, whispering promises I didn't know how to keep. Outside the window, I could see fireworks bursting in the sky. Beautiful, colorful, meaningless. My phone buzzed with messages from mutual relatives, sending me pictures of the wedding, unaware of how cruel it felt. Champagne fountains, golden arches, designer suits. A world so far from mine, it might as well have been another planet. That night, I made a vow to myself. If Lily survived, I would never ask anyone for help again, and if she didn't, I would make sure the world remembered her name. Either way, I would rise from the ashes they buried me in, because nothing burns brighter than a mother's pain turned into purpose. After that night, something in me broke. But another part of me woke up. I stopped asking why the world was cruel, and started asking what I could do about it. Every morning, I would wake up in that same hospital room, listening to the machines that kept my daughter alive. But instead of crying, I began planning. The doctors said the surgery had to happen soon, or it would be too late. I didn't have time to wallow in despair. I began selling everything I owned. My furniture, my jewelry, even my car. I walked to work in the cold, my shoes splitting at the seams. But I didn't care. I was saving for life, not comfort. People pitied me, whispered behind my back about how desperate I'd become. But I stopped caring what anyone thought. Desperation becomes power when you stop being ashamed of it. One of the nurses at the hospital told me about a small business grant for single mothers. I didn't know anything about running a business, but I applied anyway, writing through tears late at night while Lily slept. I didn't expect to get it, but 2 months later, an envelope arrived. It wasn't much, $10,000, but to me, it felt like the universe giving me one last chance. With that money, I started a small catering service from home. I knew food, I knew struggle, and I knew how to make people feel something with flavor. I worked day and night, cooking meals for offices, parties, and fundraisers. Every dollar went into Lily's surgery fund. Some nights, I barely slept, but little by little, things changed. People loved my food, not because it was fancy, but because it felt real. Orders started piling up. Within 6 months, I moved from my tiny kitchen to a rented commercial space. Within a year, I had a team, but time was running out. Lily's condition got worse before it got better. I still couldn't afford the full cost of the surgery, so I made a choice I never thought I'd make. I went to the media. I shared our story on a local news page, not to shame anyone, but to find help. The story went viral overnight. Donations poured in from strangers who believed in me more than my own family did. We raised enough for the surgery in 2 weeks. The day Lily was wheeled into that operating room, I held her hand and whispered, "You made it, baby. You did it." And she smiled. That same brave, fragile smile, before they closed the doors. The surgery was long, almost 12 hours. I sat in the hallway, clutching her teddy bear, praying to every god I could name. When the doctor finally came out and said the words, "She's going to be okay," I fell to the floor sobbing. For the first time in years, they were tears of relief, not pain. Lily recovered slowly, but she made it. I promised her then that we would never be victims again. Over the next 5 years, everything changed. My catering business exploded. What started as one woman's desperation became a brand that people trusted. I began getting calls from corporations, event planners, even government offices. I built a company, expanded into event management, and eventually owned a chain of luxury banquet halls. Ironically, I became the person people called to organize their weddings. The very thing my family once chose over my daughter's life. I started making more money than I ever dreamed of. But I didn't spend it on diamonds or designer gowns. I bought a home near the ocean where Lily could breathe fresh air and run without machines. I built scholarships for single mothers like me and funded children's hospitals, and through it all, I kept my silence. I never confronted my family, never reached out, never gloated. I wanted the universe to handle that part, and eventually it did. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when my phone rang, and I saw a name I hadn't seen in years, Caroline. I almost didn't answer, but something inside me told me to. Her voice trembled, her words rushed. Their company had gone bankrupt after a major lawsuit. Her husband had fled overseas, leaving her with debt, no money, and a house the bank was about to take. She said she didn't know where else to turn, that she needed help, that she was desperate. I sat there in silence, letting every memory replay in my mind, the marble floor under my feet, the pity in her eyes, the sound of her laughter at that wedding while I cried beside a hospital bed. But I didn't hang up because the woman I'd become didn't believe in revenge through cruelty, only through truth. I told her to meet me at my office the next day. When she walked in, she looked nothing like the sister I remembered. Her makeup couldn't hide the cracks life had carved into her face. She looked small, broken, like a version of me from years ago. She begged for a job, any position that could help her get back on her feet. And as I looked at her, I realized something powerful. Life had brought her to me not so I could destroy her, but so I could show her what real strength looks like. I hired her. Not because I owed her mercy, but because mercy was the one thing she had never given. The day Caroline started working for me, the universe felt strangely quiet. It was as if life itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. She didn't recognize at first just how much the world had changed, or how much I had. My office overlooked the city, glass walls and silver light pouring through like poetry. The same woman who once couldn't spare $1 for my dying child now sat in the waiting area, filling out job forms, her trembling hands leaving smudges of ink on the paper. I watched from a distance as she walked in, shoulders hunched, her pride already long gone. I placed her in a basic administrative position, not to humiliate her, but to remind her that dignity can only be rebuilt through humility. For weeks, she worked silently. Some employees didn't even realize she was my sister. I didn't tell them. I wanted her to feel, really feel, what it's like to start at the bottom, with no one holding the ladder. I saw her eat lunch alone, counting coins before buying a sandwich from the cafeteria. I saw her flinch every time someone mentioned weddings or money. I didn't pity her. I understood her because I'd been her once invisible, desperate, praying for a miracle that never came. Months passed. My business was thriving more than ever. We had contracts with elite clients, politicians, and even royal families. Ironically, one of our largest upcoming events was a wedding worth nearly $500,000, and my company was handling every detail. It was the kind of luxury Caroline once bragged about hosting. One afternoon, my event director came to me saying that one of our VIP planners had fallen sick, and we needed someone to supervise the wedding preparations. I looked at Caroline sitting at her desk, lost in thought, and said quietly, "Send her." When she arrived at the venue, her breath caught, the chandeliers glistened, the marble floors reflected golden light, and the scent of imported lilies filled the air. Everything looked familiar, painfully familiar, because it was the same ballroom where she had once celebrated her own wedding years ago. Only now, it was my company's name on the banner outside. My vision, my empire. That night, as guests arrived in limousines and photographers lined the red carpet, Caroline stood in the corner, wearing the staff uniform, the same color as the one I used to wear when serving coffee at other people's events. She watched women glide across the floor in designer gowns while she adjusted table linens and guided servers. I saw her from across the room, frozen in disbelief as she looked at me, standing near the stage in a tailored suit, the spotlight catching just enough to remind her who I had become. Our eyes met, and in that moment she knew. The music faded as I stepped forward to give a short speech for the newlyweds. I spoke about love, about family, about how people forget that compassion is the only luxury that never loses value. Every word was a mirror reflecting back her choices. When I finished, I looked directly at her and said, "To those who stood beside me when I had nothing, you are the reason I stand here today." The applause filled the hall, but her silence was louder. I could see tears forming in her eyes, not from pain but realization. She approached me later that night, her voice barely a whisper, asking how I found the strength to forgive. I told her forgiveness wasn't a gift I gave her. It was a freedom I gave myself. Holding on to hate would have chained me to the same misery she lived in. Letting go was how I won. A week later, she came to my office again. This time, not for work, but to return something. She placed a small photo of me and Lily from years ago on my desk. It was the same photo I'd left behind, the day she turned us away. She said she kept it all this time, that every time she looked at it, she felt a piece of herself breaking. And then she said words I never thought I'd hear. "You were the better sister." I didn't respond. I just nodded, watching as she turned and walked out, carrying the weight of her own decisions. For the first time, I saw her not as my enemy, but as a mirror of everything I survived. What she didn't know was that I had already transferred a large sum of money into her account anonymously, not because I wanted her gratitude, but because I remembered what desperation felt like. Sometimes the best revenge is kindness disguised as power, and when she eventually discovered it, she'd know that I had become the kind of woman she could never break again. Years passed, and peace slowly found its way into my life, like sunlight slipping through curtains after a long storm. Lily grew up stronger than ever. The doctors called her recovery a miracle, but I knew it wasn't magic. It was willpower, hers and mine combined. She was 16 now, full of dreams and quiet wisdom beyond her years. She didn't remember much about the nights I cried beside her hospital bed. But sometimes, when she saw the small scar near her chest, she would hug me tighter, as if her soul remembered everything her mind couldn't. One afternoon, as we sat watching the waves crash against the shore outside our home, she asked me a question that stopped me cold. She said, "Mom, why do people hurt others when they have so much?" I looked at her, at the life I almost lost, and realized how far we'd come. I told her that some people mistake wealth for worth, and when they lose one, they realize they never had the other. She smiled, leaned her head on my shoulder, and said, "Then I'm glad we had nothing because it made us everything." That single sentence undid years of pain. I never saw Caroline much after she left my company. She moved away quietly, started volunteering at a children's hospital, and lived a simpler life. Sometimes I'd get updates through distant relatives, how she'd stopped wearing diamonds, how she'd begun writing letters to families who couldn't afford medical care. Perhaps she was trying to make peace with her own soul, and maybe that was enough. As for me, I never forgot the nights I felt invisible, the days I begged for help and was turned away. But I no longer carried them like wounds. I carried them like lessons. I learned that real power isn't in money. It's in mercy. Real revenge isn't in destroying those who hurt you. It's in building a life so bright that their shadows can't touch you anymore. Now, whenever I see a mother struggling in the grocery store line, counting coins for medicine, I remember who I used to be. I help her quietly, without expecting thanks, because once I was her and once someone refused me. The cycle has to break somewhere. As the sun set that evening, I looked out over the water, feeling the same peace I once thought I'd never find. The sound of Lily's laughter mixed with the ocean breeze, and for the first time, I understood that everything I'd lost was leading me here. To this moment, this silence, this strength. They spent $350,000 on a wedding, but I built an empire out of pain. They refused to save my daughter's life, but in the end, they came to me for their own. And that's the thing about life. When you choose greed over grace, you eventually pay a price that no money can cover.